Hello, my friend, or perhaps good evening, or good morning, or whatever gentle hour has wrapped itself around you. It doesn't matter what the clock says, where you are. What matters is that you are here, now, in this soft and secret corner of time. You can let the sharpness of the day fall away like sand slipping from your fingers. There is nothing you must do, no duty pressing against your ribs. The world can wait. Let your mind loosen its grip and rest. Tonight, we are traveling somewhere far, but quietly. We are slipping backwards, past centuries that have hardened into stone until they crumble at our touch and drift away like ash. Have you ever wondered, in the still moments, what someone from long ago might have reached for when hunger whispered softly in the space between battles? Not at a grand feast with polished lacquer trays and ceremonial fans unfurling like captured butterflies. Not in the carefully painted scrolls that show them standing like carved statues of duty, but in the unrecorded quiets when they were simply human, with a stomach that grumbled and a mouth that longed for something familiar and fleeting. It is so easy to forget that warriors once craved little things. The image that history leaves us of the samurai is one of perfect discipline, all blade and silence, as if their hearts beat only for the clang of steel. But beneath the layers of armor and duty, they were men and women whose lives unfolded in rhythms, in hunger and fatigue, in tiny rebellions that slipped between the cracks of expectation. If you close your eyes, you might see one now. Not on a battlefield, not in the echoing corridors of a castle with its polished wooden floors glowing like captured sunlight. Picture instead a lonely figure crouched by a riverbank on the outskirts of Kyoto, the reeds bending gently in the night breeze, his armor piled beside him like the discarded shell of a cautious creature. His hands, calloused and steady, are clumsy as he unwraps a small twist of paper to reveal a piece of dried sweetfish, its surface glistening faintly in the moonlight. He chews slowly, savoring the salt, the ghost of sweetness clinging to the flesh. For this one moment, he is not a servant of lords or law. He is only a man soothing the hollow ache inside him. We do not often pair the word junk with samurai. It feels like placing a stray laugh in the middle of a funeral. The word itself suggests something frivolous, unnecessary, a guilty indulgence. But that is only because history has hidden the crumbs. It has swept them neatly away from the tatami mats, polished the lacquered boxes, sealed the scrolls with wax, until nothing messy remains. And yet the crumbs were there, scattered like quiet confessions. In the long stretches of waiting that shaped their lives, in the dusty roads between campaigns, in the lonely inns where the air smelled of smoke and horse sweat and drying straw, they snacked, they nibbled, they found ways to feed the body without disturbing the armor of their image. Much of what we would call junk food was born not from pleasure, but from necessity. That is the curious part. A pouch of roasted barley powder might seem plain, even bleak to our modern eyes, but to a weary retainer, it was a lifeline. A pinch stirred into water became a paste, just enough to keep the body upright for another march through endless green hills. Rice crackers glazed with soy offered a brittle comfort between drills. Pickled plums so sharp they made the tongue tremble were tucked into travel packs like charms against exhaustion. Even dried cuttlefish strips, curling like old letters when warmed near coals, carried the tang of distant seas to men who had not seen the ocean in months. And yet, there was sweetness too, because even warriors dreamed of sweetness. Sugar was rare, expensive, arriving in tiny quantities from faraway coasts like rumors from another world. When it appeared, it was treasured candied chestnuts wrapped in paper, sticky rice cakes glazed with honey, sweet sake lees stolen in secret moments. They were small bursts of joy in lives that demanded the constant dulling of joy. And that tension between restraint and indulgence, between duty and desire, wove itself through everything they ate. To be a samurai was to belong to the silence of stone, but to be human was to long for the crackle of roasted seaweed on the tongue. Perhaps that is why this story lingers like incense, because it is not only about food, it is about the quiet ways they reminded themselves they were still alive, about the secret moments that no scroll bothered to paint, no scribe thought to preserve. It is about being secretly human in a world that demanded something more than human. And if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it, the faint rustle of paper wrapping being unfolded in the dark, the soft crackle of roasted millet between teeth, the small exhale of someone finally, briefly, at ease. As we walk together through their world tonight, notice how different the rhythm is from our own. The streets of Edo at dusk are narrow and damp. The stones still holding the warmth of the day. Oil lamps blink like sleepy fireflies. The air smells of cedar and miso and distant rain. Vendors hum softly to themselves as they stir pots of steaming broth. Sandals slap against the ground in slow, unhurried steps. Everything moves as if underwater, as if time has become thick and syrupy. And in this slowed world, even the smallest bite becomes something sacred. Imagine yourself among them. Your sandals damp from the mist, your hair heavy with the smell of smoke from a roadside brazier. You slip through the crowds, your shoulder brushing against silk sleeves and straw cloaks. A boy waves a skewer of roasted rice balls glazed in soy sauce, their surfaces blistered from the fire. The smell makes your stomach stir. You have walked all day beneath the weight of your armor, and though your rank forbids such common indulgence, your body does not care. You buy one. The warmth seeps through your fingers. You bite. The salt and char and soft rice bloom across your tongue, and for just a heartbeat, you are no longer a blade bound to duty, you are simply alive. Even the highest lords were not immune. In the lacquered corridors of castles, behind sliding doors painted with cranes and pines, secret pouches of candied beans or honeyed rice were hidden in the folds of ceremonial robes. A lord might nibble one while reviewing petitions, the sweetness dissolving quietly as he weighed matters of life and death. It was never about hunger. It was about claiming a fleeting spark of humanity before the weight of expectation crushed it entirely. The cravings were small, but they were defiant. They were the heartbeat beneath the armor, and perhaps they are the truest glimpse we will ever have of who these warriors really were. Not the myth of cold perfection, but the reality of warm, flawed humans who sometimes wanted nothing more than a bite of something sweet and pointless. That is why this story matters, because it lets us meet them where history refuses to look, in the quiet, unguarded moments when they allowed themselves to be soft. So let the sharp edges of the world slip away now. You are here with me, and we are going to follow their crumbs through the centuries, past the scrolls that lied by omission, past the monuments that froze them into statues. We will find them in the glow of lanterns bobbing on dark canals, in the hush of wind through thin paper walls, in the taste of salt and smoke and sugar on the tongue. We will follow them not as warriors, but as humans, as men and women who, just like you, sometimes needed something small and unnecessary to remind themselves they were still alive. Let the sound of the present recede. Breathe slowly. The night is waiting. The streets of Edo are waiting. The paper-wrapped secrets of the samurai are waiting. And we are going to find them, softly, one bite at a time. The night folds gently around the low edges of Edo, and you can almost feel how soft its darkness was, how it gathered in the narrow alleys like breath held too long. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of old wood soaked through from countless rains, and faint threads of smoke curled from braziers that glimmered like dying stars along the roadside. The city at this hour was neither asleep nor awake. It hung suspended, as if it too were listening. A single sandal scuffed somewhere down the lane, the hollow clap of straw against stone, and then silence again. This is where they lived, the low-rank samurai, not in the grand halls or on the bright stages of history, but in these hushed in-between spaces, drifting through the city like thin ghosts, still tethered to their bodies. They were the ones who walked with straight backs but empty purses, who carried swords they could not afford to stain, who bowed when spoken to but often dined on little more than air. And yet, even they, even these hungry shadows, found ways to taste life in small, secret bites. If you had followed one of them through the alleys on a night like this, you would not have thought him a warrior. His armor would be stored away, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the damp from gnawing at it. And he would wear the soft, faded robes of someone who has learned to move unnoticed. His hands, so trained to grip a blade without trembling, would fidget at the cord of a small pouch tied at his hip. Inside might be roasted barley powder, its smell faintly nutty, almost sweet, clinging to his fingertips as he pinched some to his lips. It wasn't much. It was never much, just enough to quiet the hollow ache that had been echoing inside him since the day began. An ache he carried as silently as he carried his duty. He would stand there in the shadows, the barley grit melting on his tongue, and for a moment he would be neither samurai nor beggar, neither blade nor burden. He would simply be full enough to keep walking. There was something haunting about their hunger. It was not the fierce, clawing hunger of desperation, but a quiet, slow erosion, like a river wearing down stone grain by grain. It shaped them. It softened the sharpness of their pride into something more fragile. Many of these men lived on stipends so small they shrank a little each year, like candles left too long in the sunday. They had honor, but honor could not be boiled into soup. So they learned to stretch what little they had, to pretend the emptiness was discipline, to mask necessity as restraint. And in this strange space between want and duty, junk food became their small rebellion, their secret comfort. Not the lavish indulgence of feasts, but the modest defiance of a warm skewer of grilled rice balls snatched from a roadside vendor, the surface blistered and sticky with soy glaze. He would eat it quickly, not from shame exactly, but from an instinct to let pleasure pass before it could be seen. The sweetness and salt would bloom against the dryness of his mouth, and for that brief flicker of time, he was only human again. The city seemed to understand this need for quiet indulgence. Edo at night was a living thing. Its heartbeat slowed to a drowsy thrum. Paper lanterns swayed from eaves like sleepy eyes, their light soft and gold, trembling when a breeze whispered through. The cobblestones still held the memory of the day's heat, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of soy and smoke and damp moss. Somewhere, a vendor hummed to himself as he stirred a pot, the sound thin and wandering. There was no spectacle here, no grandeur, only the comforting anonymity of darkness. And within that anonymity, the low samurai could be something other than what the world demanded. They could be just another hungry soul following the pull of warmth and smell, just another body pausing in the glow of a food stall to let the night hold them for a while. Some nights they sought the comfort of texture more than taste. A strip of dried squid, tough and chewy, gave the jaws something to fight beside silence. The salt would bloom slowly, coaxed out by patient teeth, and in that act of slow gnawing they seemed to wrestle with their own restlessness. It was not that the squid was delicious, it rarely was, but that it lasted. It occupied the mouth, gave the hands something to hold, gave the mind something to circle like a hawk over a field. It was a small anchor against the drift of loneliness. He might stand there beneath the eaves of a shuttered shop, the paper sign above him fluttering faintly, and chew as if the world were ending and this was the last task that mattered. Often they carried their snacks like secrets. A small parcel tucked in the fold of a sleeve, a twist of cloth at the bottom of a travel pack, something they could pretend not to need until the world turned away. Dried rice cakes were common, hard as old wood until they were warmed near a brazier. When they softened and released a shy fragrance of smoke and grain, they broke apart with a soft crack and dissolved into powder on the tongue, leaving behind the faintest sweetness, like a memory you're not sure you imagined. He might eat one crouched on the edge of a quiet bridge, watching moonlight wobble on the black water below, his reflection bending and trembling until it no longer looked like him at all. There was no glory in these moments. That was the point. Glory was heavy. It clung to the shoulders like wet armor, demanded witnesses, demanded performance. These snacks, these little rebellions, belonged to a different world, a world without watchers. They were like exhalations, the breath let go after a day of holding it in. And maybe that is why they tasted better than they should have. Because they tasted of solitude. And solitude was the only luxury he could afford. Now and then he would pass a tea stall, its thin walls of bamboo and paper glowing from within. A single old woman might sit there stirring a pot of sweet amazake, the fermented rice drink thick and pale, steam curling from its surface like slow drifting ghosts. The smell was soft, creamy, touched with the memory of blossoms. It was the kind of sweetness that made the body remember spring even in the claw of winter. If he had a coin to spare, he would step inside and sit on the worn mat, feeling the warmth soak into his legs through the thin fabric of his robes. He would cradle the cup as if it were alive, sip carefully, and feel the warmth pool in his stomach like the first sunlight after a long rain. And as it spread, something inside him would unclench just a little, enough that the edges of the world blurred and softened. He would sit there until the cup was empty and the silence felt less sharp, and then he would bow and slip back into the night. No one wrote about these moments. The chronicles spoke of battles and treaties, of lords and lineages, of honor defended and honor lost, but they never mentioned the taste of sweet rice on a cold night, or the sound of teeth breaking a rice cracker in the dark. Perhaps they thought such things unworthy of record, too small to matter. But sometimes it is the smallest things that reveal the most. In these quiet indulgences, you see them as they truly were, not the marble masks of duty, but warm, weary creatures trying to soothe the gnawing inside them. It makes you realize how fragile the boundary was between legend and loneliness. And so he would walk on, the taste of sweetness fading from his tongue like the last note of a distant bell, the darkness of Edo folding around him again. His belly would still be half empty, his stipend still meager, his duty still waiting at dawn like a stone he must lift again. But for a little while, he had been more than duty. He had been human. He had let himself remember what it was to be warm and soft and alive, if only for the length of a single bite. And perhaps that was enough. The streets would grow quieter as he walked, the lanterns guttering one by one until their light was just a dim amber breath trembling on the wind. A dog would bark once and fall silent. The moon would tilt low, silvering the tiled roofs, and the whole city would seem to exhale. He would climb the steps to his small rented room, the boards creaking softly beneath his feet, and slide the paper door closed with a whisper. Inside it would be cold, the air still, and smelling faintly of ink and dust. He would sit in the dark, listening to his own breath, and press his fingers to his lips, as if to hold the taste there a little longer. Outside, the night would keep on flowing, carrying his secret with it. And so the low samurai endured, not on glory, not on honor, but on these tiny stolen comforts. They were the hidden heartbeat beneath the silence of history, the quiet truth that the scrolls never painted. And if you listen carefully enough, if you let the noise of the present fall away until all that's left is the slow echo of your own breath, you can almost hear him still, chewing softly in the dark, a shadow with a spark of warmth hidden deep inside. By the time the night fully folds around Edo, when the crowds have thinned to murmurs and the shutters have drawn down like tired eyelids, these middle-ranked samurai are still awake, not pacing guard towers, not patrolling alleys, not sharpening their swords under the hard rhythm of duty, but sitting in rooms of polished cedar and paper where silence pools like ink. They are the ones who live just high enough to be watched, yet just low enough to be forgotten, perched on that fragile ledge between obligation and indulgence. Their stipends are steady but tight, enough to maintain a sheen of dignity without quite dulling the gnawing edge of want. Hunger comes to them differently than it does to the low-ranked, less as a sharp bite, more as a constant ghost brushing against their ribs, never starving, never full. And when it stirs in the quiet hours, they feed it not with scraps grabbed in shadow, but with small, careful luxuries consumed like secrets, luxuries they can afford, only if they pretend they are not luxuries at all. They move through the city like drifting lacquered leaves, quiet but glimmering. Their robes are softer, their sleeves lined, their sandals of better weave, yet their steps are measured as if each sound must justify its existence. When they pause at the night stalls, it is not in the open glow of the fire but at the edges, where the shadows blur their outlines. They choose with deliberate slowness, as though their hunger were an aesthetic rather than a need. A skewer of grilled mochi rice cakes glistening with soy and sugar will be lifted with the same composure they use to handle a brush, their faces calm even as the sweet salty aroma coils upward to stir the quiet creature of desire inside their chests. The vendor will avert his gaze, half from respect and half from collusion, in the fiction that this is not indulgence but ceremony. And they will walk away chewing with eyes lowered, as if tasting were a private prayer. There is an elegance to the way they hunger, not the desperate clawing of emptiness, but a controlled unraveling, a careful loosening of the knot they spend their days tightening. Their lives are measured in rituals, paperwork, bows, inspections, letters, sealed and resealed, and each ritual pares away a sliver of their humanity. Food becomes their rebellion against that erosion. not through excess, but through texture and fragrance, through moments that remind the body it is still more than a sheath for duty. In winter, they favor roasted chestnuts, sold from iron pans that hiss and pop in the cold air. The shells are cracked open with fingertips stiff from the chill, the steam rising in slow curls, carrying the earthy sweetness into their faces like a memory of warmth they are not supposed to need. They chew them slowly, savoring the way the soft flesh collapses, each bite a small act of defiance wrapped in composure. Sometimes they linger at tea houses, not the rough roadside stalls of the lower ranks, but the discreet, dimly lit rooms tucked behind sliding doors painted with pale cranes. Inside, the world softens. The air is warm and smells faintly of tatami and cedar smoke, and the chatter of merchants fades to a far-off hum. Here they order yokan thick, jellied sweets made from red bean paste and sugar, dense and glistening like slices of captured dusk. They cut them into delicate squares with lacquered knives and lift them to their lips with the deliberate grace of men unaccustomed to indulgence. The sweetness is almost too much, blooming like fire in a mouth trained for austerity, and their eyelids flicker as if some part of them wants to close under the weight of it. They drink pale green tea afterward to wash the heat down into their stomachs, the bitterness cooling the sweetness, restoring the balance their lives demand. And when they leave, their footsteps are lighter, as though their shadows have been fed as well. These men understand appearances like they understand breathing. Every gesture is performance, every glance an offering to reputation. So their snacks must carry the illusion of refinement, of control. Even their junk food is wrapped in ritual. A simple senbei rice cracker becomes an object of contemplation. They examine its surface for the sheen of glaze, tap it gently to hear the dry ring of its body, break it cleanly with a careful snap. The crumbs they brush from their sleeves with quiet precision, erasing the evidence of pleasure. To see them, you would think they felt nothing, but inside, the shatter of the cracker echoes louder than swords, a reminder that life can fracture into joy, even under discipline's weight. Their hunger is never just for food. It is for permission to want, to feel, to take without earning. It is for a fleeting reprieve from the unblinking gaze of honor. They have spent years sculpting themselves into instruments, shaving away softness until only the blade remains. Yet, in the still moments, the body remembers. It remembers rain-wet summers in childhood when fruit dripped down their wrists, remembers laughter that spilled from their mouths before they learned to weigh words like currency, remembers hunger as something simple rather than shameful. So when they indulge, they are not feeding their stomachs. They are feeding the ghosts of the boys they were before the code claimed them. A handful of candied beans rattling gently in a pouch, bright as little lacquered pebbles, can undo a decade of restraint for the space of a breath. They often eat alone, not from pride, though pride cloaks them like a second skin, but because solitude makes indulgence safer. Alone, there are no eyes to reflect desire back at them, no need to armor their pleasure in irony or detachment. Alone, they can let their shoulders sag, let their chewing slow, let their gaze soften until the edges of the world blur. In these private feasts, they sit like monks before small altars, the food offered not to gods but to the fragile humanity they keep hidden beneath their layers of obligation. Sometimes they do not even swallow right away. They let the sweetness sit on their tongues until it dissolves, until the ache of wanting gives way to the ache of loss. And then they close their eyes as if listening to something only they can hear. The city watches them even when they think it does not. The narrow lanes of Edo hold sound like bowls hold water, every footstep slipping through the night to stir distant dogs from their sleep. And yet there are places where the world forgets to look. A back garden behind a quiet inn, where plum blossoms fall silently into a stone basin. A deserted courtyard where the moss has grown thick and soft, muffling the ground. Here they unwrap their secret bites, a rice ball pressed with pickled plum at its heart, hidden from sight until the teeth find it. The salt and sour bloom like fireworks in the dark cave of the mouth. And for a moment the taut strings of their composure loosen. Their eyes close. They breathe out, and then they eat the rest quickly, as though swallowing the evidence of weakness before the night can see. There is something almost tender in their caution. They do not fear punishment for indulgence. Their rank shields them from scorn. What they fear is the crack it might open in their armor, a crack through which longing could slip, through which doubt might seep, softening the hard edges they have spent their lives sharpening. So they consume pleasure in precise doses, like medicine, never enough to intoxicate, only enough to remember what intoxication might feel like. It is a delicate dance, this measured surrender, and they perform it with the same control they bring to sword drills and ink brushwork. And yet beneath the surface, the hunger hums, a low, restless chord. In the quiet after eating, they often sit very still, as if hoping the moment will stretch. The sweetness lingers on their tongues like a fading lantern glow, and they chase it not with more food but with memory. They remember the sound of their own laughter once, high and careless. They remember a festival night when they were still boys, lanterns bobbing like golden moons over the river, the air thick with the smell of grilled eel and sugar. They remember wanting without shame, and then they rise, smooth their sleeves, and fold themselves back into the shape the world expects, leaving the fragments of that memory behind like shed petals. If you passed one on the street after such a secret feast, you would see no change. His back would be as straight, his gaze as cool, his step as measured, but something in him would be softer, as though the ice beneath his ribs had thinned. He would walk through the sleeping city with the faintest warmth glowing behind his eyes, carrying the echo of sweetness like a hidden ember. No one would know. No one ever did. That was the beauty of it. These small, stolen luxuries existed only for the instant they were consumed, vanishing as completely as if they had never been. And yet they left their mark, not on the body but on the soul, reminding it quietly that it was still alive, still more than duty. In the end, that is what their junk food truly was. Not indulgence, not rebellion, but remembrance. A way to remember their own softness without shattering their hard-won shape. A way to taste the world not as weapon or warden, but as something fleeting and beautiful, like rain on the tongue. They never spoke of it. They never wrote of it. But if you stand in the old alleys of Edo when the lanterns sway low and the mist curls up from the stones, you can almost feel them still, the faint warmth, the held breath, the soft click of teeth on sweetness in the dark. In the highest rooms of Edo's castles, where the paper walls were painted with cranes poised forever in silent flight, and the tatami floors sighed faintly under the weight of silken robes, the air always seemed to hold its breath. Time itself walked more slowly here, each moment gliding forward like a lacquered boat on still water. The lords and senior retainers of the samurai world lived within this suspended hush, surrounded by wealth so polished it reflected back every flicker of weakness, every tremor of want. Their lives were an endless sequence of choreographed gestures, bows at precise angles, words measured to the grain, glances that carried entire verdicts. But even within this exquisite machinery, the quiet ache of hunger persisted, not the bodily hunger of emptiness. Their kitchens were full, their tables precise in their abundance. This was a different hunger, one that stirred at the edges of their ribs like an old song, half forgotten, a longing, not for nourishment, but for something unnecessary, unpermitted, deliciously human. And so, like foxes slipping between garden shadows, they sought their junk food in secret, cloaked in ritual so elaborate it disguised desire as duty. To see them by daylight, you would think they had transcended appetite entirely. They dined at banquets where each dish was a work of art. Slices of sashimi, translucent as frozen breath, rice molded like white pearls, broths so delicate they tasted more of silence than of salt. Servants knelt like ripples around them, refilling lacquer bowls the instant they were emptied. And yet none of it belonged to them. Those meals were performances, meant not to satisfy, but to display control. Like calligraphy drawn so slowly, it ceases to be writing, and becomes only proof of composure. They ate without chewing, smiled without savoring, spoke without listening, their bodies present only as vessels for expectation. The food passed through them like wind through bamboo, leaving no warmth behind. But when night unpinned the world, and the last servant's footsteps faded down the corridor, then, only then, did they allow themselves to hunger. It often began with silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, that hums against the skin. They would sit alone in their private chambers, the lamps turned low, so the gold leaf on the screens caught only fragments of light, glimmering like distant stars. Their armor would be displayed on stands at the far wall, hollow-eyed and still. and beside it a small black lacquered chest that held their secret treasures. Not gold, not weapons, snacks, a scattering of candied chestnuts wrapped in silk paper, a pouch of sugared rice puffs that crackled faintly when touched, a slender jar of dark syrup brought at great expense from far southern islands. These were not items befitting warriors, and that was precisely why they cherished them. Each was a fragment of forbidden softness, a reminder that they were not entirely made of iron. They would open the chest slowly, as if fearing to wake something, and select their prize with fingers more accustomed to gripping scrolls or hilts than sweetness. The sound of the paper tearing would seem deafening in the quiet, so they tore it carefully, breath held. The first bite was always taken with eyes closed, not out of reverence, though it looked like reverence, but out of fear that pleasure might be too sharp to face directly. The sweetness bloomed on their tongues like a secret they were not supposed to know. It was overwhelming, almost violent, after a day spent armoring themselves in restraint. Their shoulders would soften, just slightly, as if some tightly wound thread inside them had gone slack. And in that moment, for the span of a heartbeat, they were not lords or legends or keepers of ancestral honor. They were only men, and they were happy. Even their indulgence bore the stamp of power. They never devoured, never tore or gulped. They nibbled, they savored. They let each morsel dissolve as though they were tasting moonlight. This was not gluttony, it was control masquerading as surrender. Or perhaps surrender masquerading as control. They might spend an hour with a single piece of yokun, slicing it into slivers so thin the candlelight passed through them, placing each fragment on the tongue and waiting for it to melt entirely before taking the next. The act became less about sweetness than about time, slowing it, stretching it, stealing back seconds from the relentless current of duty. To anyone watching, it would appear almost monastic, but inside, their hunger prowled and purred, finally fed. Sometimes they disguised their junk food as medicine. This amused them, their small, sly rebellion, smuggled in under the banner of discipline. They kept jars of preserved plums, their skins wrinkled and glossy, soaked in syrup until they gleamed like garnets. Officially, they were for digestion, a tonic after heavy meals. Unofficially, they were bursts of salt and sour and sugar that struck like lightning, flooding the mouth, making the body remember it had a pulse. They would take one, slowly, in the dim hours after the castle had gone still. The sourness would hit first, a sharp blade through the haze of the day, and then the sweetness would swell up behind it like sunlight through storm clouds. Their eyes would water, and they would laugh quietly to themselves, a sound no servant had ever heard, as if surprised to find they could still be surprised. Even the setting of their indulgence became part of the ritual. They rarely ate these forbidden sweets in the same rooms where they held audiences or signed decrees. Too much gravity clung to those spaces. Instead, they crept to forgotten corners of their estates, unused tea rooms with cracked tatami mats, moonlit verandas overlooking dry gardens where the stones gleamed like sleeping animals. Here the world did not watch. Here the past could loosen its grip on them. They would sit with their robes pooling around them like dark water, the night wind cool on their throats, and bite into a wafer of sugar-dusted mochi. The sweetness would linger on their lips like the ghost of a kiss, absurd and tender and utterly real. And when they swallowed, the world seemed to grow softer around the edges, as if the strict lines of their lives had blurred. Their greatest fear was not being caught, it was being seen. To be seen wanting was to be seen human, and humanity was a risk they could not afford. Their authority depended on distance, on the illusion that they existed beyond desire. So they hid their pleasures with the same precision they used to conceal weakness in battle. Servants were dismissed, doors were locked. Even the lamps were turned so low they seemed more memory than light. They became shadows, devouring their sweetness in silence, leaving no trace behind but the faint smell of sugar on the air. By dawn, even that would vanish. Only they would remember, and even they would pretend not to. There was something almost tragic in their care. They could command armies, alter the fate of provinces with a stroke of the brush, yet they had to steal their joy like thieves. Power had trapped them in a glass shell, visible, untouchable, brittle. The junk food became their only way to feel solid again, to remind themselves they still had bodies that could ache, and hands that could tremble, and tongues that could crave. They could never admit this. To speak of it would shatter the spell of invulnerability that kept the world obedient. So they let their sweetness melt quietly into their blood and said nothing, carried its warmth like contraband in their chests. And yet, there was beauty in their secrecy. These stolen moments were the only times they belonged wholly to themselves, not to their ancestors or their retainers, or the endless scroll of obligations unrolling behind their eyes, just to themselves, alone under the moon, sucking the syrup from a preserved plum, their armor slumbering on its stand across the room. They were free. Not for long, never for long, but long enough to remember why they endured. The sweetness reminded them not of pleasure, but of possibility. It whispered that they were not yet entirely hollow, that some small, stubborn ember of self still glowed beneath the layers of gold and duty. And so they protected that ember fiercely, feeding it crumbs of joy in the darkness like a secret pet no one must know they kept. When the first gray threads of dawn crept into the corridors, they would rise, gather the wrappers, the crumbs, the traces, and seal them away in the black lacquered chest. Their faces would be calm again, their eyes cool, their movements sharp-edged with command. By the time the servants slid open the doors, they would look as if they had never been anything but stone. But if you were close enough, if you watched carefully, you might catch the faintest echo of softness lingering at the corners of their mouths, like the afterglow of a dream. Then it would vanish. They would walk out into the waking castle, and the spell of perfection would close around them again like a golden cage. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the taste would remain. A glimmer in the dark, proof that they had once, if only for a moment, been alive in the way children are alive, unguarded, unmeasured, incandescent. That was the true treasure they guarded, more fiercely than land or lineage, not the sweets themselves, but the part of them those sweets kept alive. And though the world never saw it, never even suspected, it was this hidden ember that made their grandeur bearable. It was this secret, soft hunger that tethered them to the earth. Without it, they would have floated away like their painted cranes, beautiful and hollow and already gone. The roads beyond Edo are empty at night, so empty it feels as though the earth has forgotten it ever bore footsteps. The wind moves through the dry reeds in long shivering sighs, and somewhere far off a fox screams thinly, a sound that could be mistaken for a child if you didn't already know better. Out here, the Ronin walk, with their heads bowed against the silence, swords dull from neglect, clothes the color of old dust. They are not supposed to exist. The world of lords and ledgers has no place for them. They are memories that refuse to stay buried, fragments of an order that has already decided it is done with them. And yet their feet keep moving, one slow step after another, because the body does not know how to stop until it collapses. Hunger walks with them, not as an ache anymore, but as a hollow echo, the shape of something that used to be filled. They no longer eat like warriors. They eat like ghosts, learning how to be flesh again. The food they find is whatever has been left behind by the world. Rice hardened to stone at the bottom of an inn's pot, a handful of millet spilled in the dust near a granary, a scrap of dried fish traded for sharpening a farmer's sickle. They chew without looking at their hands, without tasting, without even fully swallowing sometimes, as if afraid to remind their bodies what satisfaction felt like. They have learned that desire is dangerous. It can flare up and burn through the thin discipline holding them upright. So they eat in thin threads, tiny bites they can pretend do not matter, and keep their eyes on the road. But sometimes, rarely, accidentally, something close to sweetness slips into their path. A vendor closing up at the edge of a village might take pity and hand them a crushed rice cracker that cracked in the jar, or the heel of a red bean bun gone dry from the day's air. These small gifts shock them. The taste is almost unbearable. Their jaws hesitate. Their eyes flicker as though they've bitten down on a memory. Sweetness pulls at places inside them they've spent months trying to cauterize. It reminds them of who they were, of the temples and courtyards and orderly gardens they once belonged to, of the nights when their names still mattered. It reminds them they are still human, which hurts more than hunger. So they chew very slowly, staring at the dark road as though it might disappear if they blink, and swallow like someone hiding contraband inside themselves. They do not linger after eating. Staying still feels like asking for the world to notice them, and the world no longer owes them mercy. They move again as soon as their mouths are empty, shadows folding back into shadows, their footsteps leaving no sound on the road. The brief warmth fades from their bellies like breath on glass. They let it fade. Wanting to keep it would be worse. Wanting anything is dangerous now. When rain comes, it comes without warning, rushing out of the hills in sudden veils. The Ronin shelter under the eaves of shrines too small to be guarded, their shoulders hunched, the smell of wet earth rising around them like a memory of gentler lives. Sometimes they find offerings left on the steps, dried rice cakes, withered fruit, small coins glimmering like blind eyes. They take only what will not be noticed. A single rice cake, split with a thumbnail, chewed while the thunder mutters far off like an old enemy who has not yet forgotten their name. The rice sticks to their teeth, tasteless and soft with damp, but it keeps the cold from gnawing too deeply into their bones. They eat with the stillness of stones. They eat like they are trying not to wake the ghosts sleeping under their ribs. There is no ritual left in their hunger. No performance, no grace. Hunger has stripped them to something simpler, something older. They eat because they are still alive, and they are still alive because they eat. It becomes a loop, as endless and meaningless as the circling of insects around a dying lantern. Yet even in this bleak cycle, the smallest moments of pleasure cling to them like burrs. A scrap of roasted yam stolen from the ashes of an abandoned hearth might carry a faint whisper of sweetness, and for the length of a single breath their eyes soften, their mouths remember how to smile. Then it passes. Always it passes. They sleep curled against temple walls, under bridges, in the lee of fallen trees, anywhere the wind sounds slightly less like accusation. At night they dream of food, not feasts or banquets, but the simple tastes they once thought too plain to remember: steamed rice still warm, miso broth curling steam into their faces, tea bitter enough to make their teeth ache. They wake with the taste still ghosting their tongues and their hands clenching at nothing. In the gray hour before dawn, they sit staring at their empty palms until the memory fades. Then they rise, stiff as old boards, and begin walking again. In villages, children watch them with wide eyes. To the young, they are both frightening and fascinating, like storybook monsters that somehow stepped off the page. The Ronin ignore them. Sometimes a child will drop a plum pit or the rind of an orange peel behind them, as if offering to a stray dog. Sometimes the Ronin stoop and pick it up, and sometimes they do not. When they do, they chew the rind for the bitterness, not the taste. It keeps the ache in their mouths sharp enough to feel real. There are nights when they find one another. Not often, and never for long. 2 or 3 drifting figures converging by chance at the edge of a burned field, drawn by the faint glow of a farmer's unattended fire. They do not speak much. Words require trust, and trust is heavier than they can carry. They share food without ceremony, passing around whatever scraps they've scavenged: a twist of dried sardines, a lump of cold rice mashed into a ball by dirty fingers, a strip of tough venison smoked to leather. They chew in silence, watching the fire eat the wood. For a little while the warmth softens the edges of the night, and they can pretend they are still men, and not just hunger wearing skin. Then one by one they rise and melt back into the darkness, each convinced he imagined the others. The roads are long, the seasons turn, the hunger never leaves. It becomes the only constant, the one companion that does not abandon them. They come to understand it the way sailors understand the sea, not as an enemy, not as a friend, but as the shape of their world. It wears them down, polishes them hollow, until they move like ghosts, even in daylight. Yet still, somehow, they keep walking. The world has forgotten them, but their bodies have not forgotten the rhythm of survival. Step, breathe, chew, swallow, step, and in rare, quiet moments, something softer slips through. A traveling merchant drops a parcel of sugared beans by mistake. A festival stall leaves behind a tray of broken rice crackers. A kind innkeeper's wife presses a secret into their palm. When no one is looking, a sweet made of barley syrup and crushed nuts, sticky and fragile as spun glass. The Ronin stand in an alley's shadow and eat it alone, piece by piece, their faces unreadable. Inside them, something stirs, something that remembers color and laughter and the sound of rain on paper screens. It frightens them. It makes their hands shake, and still they finish every bite. Then they walk on. They always walk on. The night closes behind them like water, swallowing their footprints, leaving only the faint scent of sugar on the air to prove they were ever real. The nights of Edo seem different when you are young. The shadows are not yet heavy with consequence. They curl at the edges like curious cats. Lantern light clings to the wet cobblestones as if it wants to be touched, and the air is soft with the smell of charcoal and sakura petals decaying quietly in the gutters. This is the world the young samurai first inherit, not the world of rigid scrolls and blood oaths, but the world of possibility, trembling and luminous. They move through it like moths, unsure if they are wings or flame. Their swords are new, still stiff in their scabbards, their edges clean as unspoken promises. They hold their shoulders straight because they are terrified of folding, terrified of being seen as less than the legends they have been told to become. And under that terror, hunger hums. It is not the hollow ache of the ronin, or the quiet ache of the middling retainers, but a wild, bright gnawing, a hunger as reckless as spring. They tell themselves it is not hunger for food, but for honor, for glory, for the weight of history to settle on their names. And yet, their feet keep pausing near the glowing stalls at the edges of the market, where skewers of grilled mochi hiss softly over coals, where the sweet smell of candied chestnuts coils through the dark like a beckoning finger. They glance quickly, then away, then back again, like boys at the edge of a river, unsure if they are brave enough to dive. Their teachers would scowl if they saw them here. Indulgence is weakness, they have been told. Pleasure is the enemy of focus. But their mouths water all the same. The lessons of the body came long before the lessons of duty. So they wait until no one is watching, until the street thins to whispers, and then they step forward, their heartbeat loud as drums. The first taste always shocks them. They bite into the warm rice ball and the soy glaze cracks under their teeth, spilling salt and smoke and sweetness across their tongues. Their eyes widen, the world tilts. For a moment, the training hall, the endless drills, the barked corrections, all dissolve into steam. They are just boys again, barefoot in their mother's kitchens, stealing scraps from the pot. They chew too fast, almost gulping, as though afraid the taste will be taken back if they linger. When it is gone, they stand frozen, ashamed and elated, their lips sticky, their hearts trembling like caught birds. They wipe their mouths and straighten their backs, trying to summon the mask of discipline again. But something inside them has already cracked. A thread of sweetness has wound itself through the iron framework they are trying to build, and they cannot quite untangle it. They return to their quarters in silence, the dormitory of young retainers lined with straw mats that smell of sweat and old cedar. The others are sleeping, their breath shallow with exhaustion, the moonlight striping their faces like bars. He lies down among them, but sleep will not come. The taste still echoes on his tongue, bright as struck glass. He keeps pressing his teeth together as if he could grind the memory out, but it only blooms stronger in the darkness. It frightens him, how much he wants it again, not just the food, but the moment of being unbound, unjudged, alive in a way duty does not allow. He stares at the ceiling until dawn washes the room pale and thin. The days that follow are worse. He throws himself into drills with a fervor that borders on desperation. He practices until his hands blister, until his shoulders throb, until the floor swims beneath his feet. He thinks if he moves fast enough, he can outrun the memory of sweetness. But at night, when the city softens and the teachers vanish into their quiet homes, the craving returns. It whispers to him from the alleys, from the faint hiss of cooling braziers, from the smell of syrup drifting through the dusk. He tries to ignore it. He fails. One evening he slips out again, cloak drawn high, sandals silent. This time he chooses something different, a wedge of yokan, the red bean jelly cut into glossy cubes that tremble like captured sunset. He eats it in the shadow of a shuttered shop, his back to the wall, each bite slow and trembling. The sweetness is thick and strange, almost unbearable, but he cannot stop. When it is gone, he licks his fingers clean and feels something deep inside him shudder awake. He begins to realize this hunger is not only for sugar, it is for proof that he still belongs to himself. The code he is learning demands everything: his time, his breath, his blood if called for, and he has given it, willingly, hungrily. But in giving, he has begun to feel himself thin. His laughter comes less easily now. His dreams are gray. He watches the older retainers move through the halls like carved wood, beautiful and lifeless, and something inside him rebels. He does not want to vanish like that. He does not want to become a hollow name etched on a roster. The junk food becomes his anchor, small, secret, defiant. Each bite says, "I am still here. I am still mine." Soon he is not alone. The other young ones are watching. They pretend not to, but they are. Their eyes follow him when he returns from the market, his hands empty but his shoulders a little looser. One night they follow. They find him crouched by the river, the paper lantern beside him trembling on the black water, nibbling a strip of dried sweetfish. No one speaks. Then one of them sits down, and then another, and soon they are all there, knees drawn up, eyes down, passing the fish from hand to hand. They eat in silence, the salt stinging their tongues, and though no words are spoken, they are bound together by it. This quiet act of rebellion, for the first time since they began their training, they feel like something other than competitors. They feel like boys again. The knowledge is both balm and wound. In the weeks that follow, they carve out small rituals around their secret feasts. Not every night too risky, but often enough that the hunger stops feeling like a flaw and starts feeling like a thread tying them back to themselves. They pool their coins to buy roasted chestnuts from the old man at the south gate, splitting them with solemn precision. They hide parcels of senbei crackers in the hollows of the garden wall and sneak out to eat them under the plum trees, the petals drifting pale as ash onto their hair. They do not speak while they eat. Speaking would break the spell, drag the moment back into the world of duty. They sit in the hush and let the taste bloom and fade, and in that fading they remember who they were before the code began erasing them. But sweetness always leaves traces. Their masters notice the change. The boys are sharper now, more alive, but also softer. There is laughter flickering at the edges of their discipline, glances exchanged like sparks. The masters frown. Too much softness is dangerous. It blunts the blade. Punishments grow stricter, drills harsher, praise scarcer. The boys grit their teeth and obey. Outwardly they harden again. Inwardly, they cling tighter to their secret nights. The junk food becomes more than pleasure now. It becomes resistance, a hidden flame against the cold logic of duty, a reminder that they can carry both steel and sweetness in the same hands. And they begin to understand something the older men have forgotten. Strength is not born from the absence of softness, but from surviving it. They are learning how to be both. The rice ball in one hand, the sword in the other, the code in their mouths by day, the taste of sugar lingering there by night. They carry this contradiction like contraband, and it makes them fiercer than they were before, because now they are not just fighting to prove themselves worthy of the code. They are fighting to keep the parts of themselves the code cannot touch. One night, as the rains come and the cherry blossoms rot into the gutters, he sits alone again by the river. The others are gone, scattered to their duties. The water moves black and slow, carrying the lantern light in broken pieces. He unwraps the last of the sweetfish, its paper soft from his pocket, and eats it very slowly, staring at the blurred reflection of his own face. It looks older already, sharper around the eyes. He wonders if anyone will remember the boy he is now when the man he is becoming has taken over. He wonders if he will. The sweetness is faint, almost gone, but he chews it carefully, as if memorizing it. When it is gone, he sits until the lantern burns out and the night folds back over the river. Then he rises, straightens his shoulders, and walks into the dark. The taste follows him. It always will. It is not the sweetness he will remember, not really, but the silence wrapped around it, the moment of stillness, when the world's demands slipped away and he belonged only to himself. That is what he is truly hungry for. That is what he will keep, hidden beneath the armor he is learning to build. The others will never know. The world will never know. But somewhere inside the man he will become, the boy will still be crouched by the river, lantern trembling, sugar on his tongue, refusing to disappear. By the time the sun has sunk behind the tiled rooftops of Edo, and the night breeze slips through the old wooden slats of their homes, the elder samurai sit very still. Stillness has become their language. Their bones speak it, their eyes speak it, the long silences that stretch between their words speak it. They have carried so many weights for so long that setting them down has left them hollow, as if the world has forgotten what to press against them. Their swords rest on lacquer stands now, polished but inert, and no one calls for them. They tend small gardens, trim bonsai until their fingers smell of sap, sweep their thresholds while watching the dust curl like fading smoke. The world no longer fears them. The world no longer needs them. This should feel like peace, and perhaps it does. But peace has its own kind of hunger. It is not the sharp hunger of youth or the hollow hunger of wandering. It is slower, deeper, an ache that coils quietly around the ribs like the memory of an old wound. Their days have blurred. They no longer wake to commands, only to birdsong and the creak of their own joints. The rhythm that once held them, the relentless cadence of duty, the thrum of expectation has faded, leaving hours soft and formless as fog. And in that formlessness, they find themselves reaching for small, pointless things, not because they need them, but because they are proof that something still stirs within the shell of discipline they never fully shed. A piece of candied ginger left on the kitchen shelf, its sugar crusted like frost. A rice cracker brittle as sun-bleached bone. A square of yokin sliced so thin it bends like paper. These are not indulgences now. They are markers, faint milestones on the slow path through twilight. They eat slowly, slower than they ever did. Each bite is an excavation. The sweetness does not flood them anymore. It seeps, faint and cool, like the last warmth lingering in stones at dusk. They do not close their eyes in pleasure as they once might have. Instead, they watch their hands as they chew, as if trying to memorize the way their skin folds, the way their veins trace blue maps beneath it. They are not tasting the food as much as tasting the years layered behind it. The barracks laughter of their youth hidden in the crackle of a rice cracker. The solemn quiet of a lord's chamber, dissolving on their tongues with the jelly's slow melt. The food is only a vessel. What they are eating is time. Sometimes they eat alone on the veranda, the night air cool against their cheeks, the sound of frogs pulsing from the garden pond like a distant heartbeat. The house creaks softly around them, wood settling like an old chest exhaling. They take a single plum from a jar, its skin wrinkled and dark, and place it carefully on their tongue. The sourness is gentle now, the salt softened by syrup, and it makes their eyes prickle not from sharpness but from recognition, like hearing their own name whispered by someone long dead. They sit with it in their mouths until it dissolves, and when they swallow they feel something slip further away inside them, like a lantern drifting downriver. They do not chase it, they only watch it go. They have grown unafraid of being seen. Once they hid their softness as if it were shame. Now they leave their doors open. Neighbors pass and glimpse them sitting cross-legged on the tatami, chewing a sweet bean bun as though it were the last artifact of a vanished world. The younger men bow deeply, the way one bows to a relic, and move on. The elders do not return the bow. They are past performance. They no longer need to defend the myth of what they were. What they were is gone, and what they are is quieter. They can eat sweetness openly now because there is nothing left for sweetness to threaten. And yet, they never eat much. They could, if they wished. Their stipends still arrive, though they no longer know why. Their pantries are not empty, but they take only a mouthful, a single bite. Any more would feel like lying. Their bodies have grown careful. They understand that time is measured not in days but in moments, and moments must be savored, or they vanish before they land. So they let the food linger on their tongues until it fades to a memory, and then they set the rest aside untouched. Waste no longer troubles them. What troubles them is forgetting how to feel. There are afternoons when they sit with their grandchildren, who have no idea what these quiet men once were. The children chatter and spill toys across the tatami like spilled beads, their laughter bright as struck bells. The old samurai nod and smile faintly, holding out sugared rice puffs from a small lacquer bowl. The children snatch them eagerly, the sugar dusting their lips, their joy quick and fierce as fire. The old men watch without eating. It is enough to see sweetness still burn hot in someone else's mouth. They feel it echo faintly in their own blood, like the ghost of a drumbeat. Later, when the house is empty again, they will eat one rice puff alone, letting it dissolve into silence. The seasons turn slower now. They mark them by flavor. Spring brings sakura mochi wrapped in pickled leaves, its fragrance soft as bruised flowers. Summer brings chilled sweet bean soup, the cold shocking their tongues awake. Autumn brings roasted chestnuts that crumble like old paper between their teeth. Winter brings nothing, only the bite of wind and the brittle comfort of tea without sugar. They no longer crave novelty. They only crave echoes. Each taste carries a shadow of someone they were. The fierce boy, the solemn retainer, the gilded lord, the wandering ghost. They have been all of them. They are none of them now. But when the sweetness blooms faintly in their mouths, they feel the thin threads connecting all those selves tug gently together, and for a moment they are whole. Night deepens around them. The garden fades to ink, the pond to black glass, the world to hush. They sit with their backs straight out of habit, though the weight has long since left their shoulders, and place the last bite of the night on their tongue. It is always small, always unnecessary. A fragment of sweetness so slight it would be invisible on the ledger of their lives. But it matters to them, because it reminds them they are still here, still warm, still capable of dissolving. The years have thinned them to almost nothing, yet they remain, breathing in the dark, tasting the world as gently as if it might shatter. And when the bite is gone, they do not reach for another. They fold their hands in their laps and watch the moonlight creep across the tatami like slow water. Their mouths are empty, their bellies hollow, but they feel no lack. They have learned that fullness is not the opposite of hunger. It is what comes when you stop needing to be filled. The sweetness lingers only as memory now, and memory is enough. It is more than enough. The road winds endlessly ahead, a pale scar across the dark hills, vanishing and reappearing as if it too is unsure of its resolve. Rain has been falling for 3 days without pause, turning the soil to black paste that clings to their sandals, their legs, the hems of their once proud robes. The men walk bent, their armor damp and heavy as regret, their breath puffing white in the cold. No one speaks. Words take energy, and energy has become too precious to spend on anything that is not survival. They march by rhythm now, not will the dull metronome of footfalls, the rattling sigh of gear, the occasional snap of a horse shaking water from its mane. Somewhere ahead, someone coughs. No one turns. The sound is swallowed instantly by the wet air. Hunger has grown quiet inside them, but not gone. It has shifted, like everything out here, from a sharp pang to a low ache that thrums along their bones. Meals are illusions on campaign. Rice is boiled thin and stretched into porridge until it tastes only of heat. Dried fish is gnawed until the jaw cramps. Pickled roots are rationed so strictly they might as well be memory. Yet their bodies keep asking, not for feasts, not even for satiety, just for the brief mercy of something more than fuel. They think about sweetness sometimes, unbidden, the thought rising like steam from some deep place. The march has not yet scoured clean. A rice cracker blistered golden, a candied bean crunching between their teeth. The longing is almost physical. They push it down. Longing can hollow a man faster than hunger. At night, they stop in ruined temples or under half-collapsed farmhouses, stacking their gear in neat, exhausted heaps before sinking onto their cloaks. The wind moves through the broken eaves like a restless spirit. They chew whatever they carried from the last town, usually roasted barley flour pressed into hard cakes that crack like brittle bone. It turns to paste in their mouths, dry and bland, sticking to their teeth. They swallow without tasting. Sometimes, though rarely, someone will produce something else from the depths of their pack. A strip of dried persimmon, leathery and dulled with age, its sweetness ghostly but still present, or a lump of sugar wrapped in oiled paper, gray with dust yet glimmering faintly in the firelight. When this happens, no one asks where it came from. No one looks too long. They only pass it silently hand to hand, breaking off slivers small as fingernails, placing them on their tongues like offerings. The sweetness blooms faint and slow, and for a moment they all stare into the flames with softened eyes. No one smiles. Smiling would make it fragile. They chew as quietly as monks saying prayers, and when the last fragment is gone, they sit listening to the rain until their faces harden again. The marches stretch for weeks. Days blur into each other until time feels like a single long exhale. They begin to move like sleepwalkers, the world reduced to mud, breath, weight. Their minds detach from their bodies, floating somewhere above, watching themselves trudge forward. Food becomes anchor and lifeline both. They hoard scraps of sweetness, the way drowning men hoard air. A few grains of roasted millet hidden in a sleeve, a smear of plum paste dried into the corner of a handkerchief. They nibble at them like secrets, careful never to finish them all at once, because if the sweetness ends entirely, something in them might crack. It is not about taste anymore. It is about proof that the world still contains gentleness, even if only enough to fit on the tip of the tongue. Sometimes they eat while walking. It is forbidden, unseemly, but fatigue has rubbed their edges dull. They slip a morsel of dried rice into their mouths and chew as they march, letting it soften against their tongues with the rain. The rhythm of chewing merges with the rhythm of their steps until it feels like the only thing holding them together, the hinge that keeps flesh and spirit from drifting apart. They remember almost nothing else from these marches, not the names of the villages they passed, not the color of the sky, but they will remember the texture of that rice dissolving, the way it anchored them to the moment. It becomes the closest thing to home they carry. Battles come and go like storms, sudden and consuming. When they are over, the silence feels louder than the clash ever did. Afterward, they crouch among the splintered trees and scorched grass, their armor smeared with mud and smoke, their hands trembling from the echo of impact. Hunger returns then with startling force, crashing through their numbness like a breaking wave. The camp cooks ladle out steaming rice gruel, thin and pale, and they devour it as though it were salvation. But it does not fill the hollow inside, it only masks it. So they reach for their secret pouches, the ones they have guarded even more fiercely than their swords. From these they draw out whatever sweetness has survived the march. A fragment of hard candy fused to its paper, a few grains of sugar clinging in the seam of cloth, a sticky ball of sweet bean paste flattened and cracked. They eat these slowly, reverently, even as the wind snuffs the fires around them. The sweetness pushes against the darkness like a tiny, stubborn flame. It is not enough to warm them. It is only enough to keep them from going cold entirely. Nights on campaign stretch thin as old parchment. The men lie in rows under the open sky, their cloaks drawn over them, the ground cold and damp against their backs. The stars wheel silently above, uncaring. They stare up at them and let a sliver of sugar melt on their tongues, the sweetness seeping like faint warmth into their blood. Their thoughts drift. They remember things they did not realize they had lost. The smell of tatami in their childhood homes, the sound of their mothers' voices, the first time they ever tasted chestnuts still hot from the pan. The memories hurt more than their wounds. They close their eyes to make them stop, but they linger anyway, caught like thorns in their minds. The sugar is gone quickly. The ache it wakes stays much longer. In the morning, they rise brittle as dry reeds. The wind is sharper. The march begins again. Their bodies obey out of habit now, not will. The thought of sweetness feels distant, childish, almost shameful. Yet when the column halts at a mountain pass and the men crouch in the lee of the rocks to rest, someone always reaches quietly into their pack, fingers searching through damp cloth for the last hidden scrap. Always. It has become reflex. They chew in silence, looking out over the valleys below where the mist pools like milk. And for a few heartbeats, the world feels less like a machine grinding them down and more like something they might survive. They tell themselves they are not sentimental. They tell themselves it is only food. But deep down, they know better. They know these scraps are the only softness they are allowed, the only reminder that they were once more than endurance wrapped in flesh. The sweetness slips through the cracks of their discipline like moonlight through a ruined roof, thin and cold but real. It reminds them they are still tethered to the world, still human, even if only barely, and so they guard it with the same ferocity they guard their lives. When the campaign finally ends and they march back through the gates of Edo, their armor dulled, their eyes hollow, their mouths lined with silence, the stalls are waiting for them. Lanterns sway, chestnuts hiss in their pans, steam curls from rice cakes soft as clouds. The smells hit them like blows. They do not stop. Not yet. They walk through the city like revenants, too disciplined to break ranks, too exhausted to remember how to want. But later, alone, when the dust of the road has settled from their cloaks and the echoes of drums have finally faded from their blood, they will slip out into the alleys. They will stand under a crooked paper lantern, its light trembling like their hands, and buy a skewer of grilled mochi. They will eat it slowly, each bite soft and molten, and the sweetness will bloom like warmth from deep stone. And for the first time in months, they will taste not just survival, but life. The city after dark does not belong to duty, it belongs to whispers. The lanterns sag low on their hooks, their light trembling like tired hearts, and the alleys seem to exhale. Shedding the rigid geometry they held under the Sunday walls lean closer. Footsteps soften, even the air feels looser, heavy with smoke and grilled soy and damp earth, as if all the day's sharpness has melted into steam. The samurai who walk these streets at night do so with their crests hidden, their swords left at home or wrapped in plain cloth like shame. They move among the crowd of merchants and laborers and courtesans with their heads bowed, as though listening to something no one else can hear. The city does not recognize them like this, and that is why they come. They are not here to be honored. They are here to disappear. They do not walk together. Each slips into the night alone, shedding the armor of their names in silence. To be seen with others of their kind would make the disguise fragile, and tonight they want no reflections. They want only to dissolve into the blur of voices, to become part of the current that carries everyone nowhere in particular. They let themselves be jostled in the market lanes, let fishmongers shout past their shoulders, let drunken students stumble laughing against their sleeves. No one bows, no one lowers their voice. It is intoxicating. The weight they carry every waking hour, the weight of being watched, being expected, falls away here, drowned in noise. They can feel their own edges soften. They can feel hunger return, bright and uncomplicated, like an old companion they thought they'd outgrown. The stalls are alive with it. Skewers hiss on their grills, fat crackling into flames. Steam coils from pots of sweet miso odin, thick and fragrant as childhood. Rice crackers shatter under the vendor's mallet with sharp gunshot cracks. The smells tangle and rise in warm spirals, curling into their empty chests. They hover at the edges of the light, unseen, their eyes flicking from stall to stall like moths. They are not choosing with discipline now. They are choosing with pulse. A skewer of grilled dango, glistening with soy syrup. A paper twist of candied walnuts, still warm from the pan. A thick slice of sweet egg omelet, edges caramel dark, trembling faintly in the vendor's tongs. They hand over coins without haggling and slip away before the vendor can thank them. They eat standing in the shadows between shops, their shoulders hunched as if guarding something fragile. The first bite is always startling. Sweetness feels dangerous when you are used to iron. It spreads through them like forbidden light, softening joints, loosening the knots behind their ribs. Their breath goes shallow, their eyes close, just for a heartbeat, as though the world might shatter if they look at it while tasting. The crowd moves around them, indifferent, and that indifference is a mercy. Here they are, no one. No eyes follow them. No one will carry stories of this moment back to the halls where their names are carved on ledgers like tombstones. The sweetness melts on their tongues and they let it. Let it carry away the day's hardness. Let it wash the residue of duty from their mouths. They wander deeper into the maze of streets as they eat, the stalls thinning to scattered pools of glow. The cobbles here are damp and uneven, shining like old scars, and the air smells of river mud and smoke. They find themselves near the red light quarter, where laughter slants out of the tea houses like knives wrapped in silk. They do not go in. They are not here to be touched, only to drift. They pause at a quiet corner, where a single old woman tends a brazier under a sagging awning, turning skewers of roasted sweet potatoes. The skin is blistered black, the flesh inside molten gold. She says nothing as they approach, only hands them a wrapped piece with fingers cracked from the heat. They bite into it carefully, the steam scalding their lips, the sweetness thick and earthy, filling their mouths like warmth crawling back into their bones. It is too rich, almost unbearable, and they eat it slowly, staring at the wet stones. The old woman does not look at them. She has learned the city's unspoken rule. Do not recognize anyone who wishes to be invisible. The night folds closer. The laughter fades behind them. They drift toward the river, where the lanterns float low on the black water, trembling like the last scraps of memory. Here the crowds thin to scattered shapes hunched against the wind. They sit on the steps and finish their sweets in silence, watching the current carry broken petals and paper ash downstream. They feel the sweetness thinning in their mouths, slipping away like the lantern light. For a while they do not move. It is not peace they feel, not exactly. More like absence, a soft hollow where the ceaseless machinery of duty used to grind. They let it stretch, they let it breathe. Some of them linger until the city begins to pale. The vendors are shuttering their stalls, sweeping the sugar and chestnut shells into quiet piles, the smell of charred wood fading from the air. The sky softens from black to bruised gray, and the river turns from mirror to steel. The samurai rise stiffly, brushing crumbs from their sleeves. The spell is breaking. Already their minds are crawling back toward their names, toward the crests folded on the stands in their rooms, toward the eyes that will watch them again when the sun climbs high enough to burn away shadows. They walk home slowly, the last threads of sweetness still clinging to their tongues like distant music. By the time they slide open their doors, they will have buried it. They will wash their hands. They will speak in measured tones. No one will guess where they have been, but the memory will linger, tucked somewhere deep and wordless. The smell of the grilled dango, the crack of the rice cracker under the mallet, the molten gold of the roasted sweet potato burning their tongue. They will not speak of it. They will not need to. It is enough that for a few fragile hours they were allowed to dissolve, to be no one, to taste sweetness without name or purpose. Tomorrow they will bind the armor back to their skin. They will bow and command and kill if told. But tonight, in some quiet corner of their blood, they are still standing under that crooked lantern with syrup on their lips, watching the river swallow the light. The monastery sits like a forgotten thought on the ridge, its tiled roofs sagging gently under the weight of mist, its paper walls breathing faintly in the mountain wind. The air here tastes of stone and pine sap and stillness, the kind of stillness that hums low in the ears, as if the world itself is holding its breath. The former samurai move through it like smoke, silent and pale-eyed, their hair shorn, their robes coarse and colorless. They rise before dawn, when the sky is still the color of cold iron, and sweep the corridors in measured strokes, the bristles hissing softly against the old boards. They do not speak unless spoken to. They do not ask questions. The rhythm of their days has dissolved all sharpness from them, sanding them smooth as river stones. No one here remembers their names. That is the point. Hunger comes differently in this place. It is not the gnawing animal they carried on campaign, not the sly whisper of rebellion that haunted them in the city, not even the soft ache of age. It has thinned, become almost abstract, like the faint creak of the roof beams or the breath of fog curling through the cloisters. They eat only what is given, bowls of thin gruel, steamed greens glistening with dew, a single pickled plum set like a drop of blood on the rice. The meals are silent, their bowls lifted and lowered with ritual care, their eyes downcast. The taste is not meant to please, only to sustain. It washes through them like cold water through hollow bamboo, leaving nothing behind. And yet, sometimes, rarely, something sweet arrives. It is never much. A visiting pilgrim might leave behind a pouch of dried persimmons as offering, their flesh dark and sugared like old amber. Once, on the equinox, the head monk distributed a single square of yoken to each man, small as a coin, glistening like congealed dusk. The sweetness strikes them like lightning. It shatters the calm they have spent years layering around themselves. Their jaws hesitate, their hands tremble. Some of them close their eyes, though they are not supposed to. The taste drags them backward in time like a river reversing its flow. They see barracks glowing in winter dawn, smell the oiled leather of armor, hear laughter echoing down castle halls. They see their own faces as they were bright-eyed, sharp-edged, full of noise. The sweetness is unbearable. It hurts more than hunger ever did. They chew slowly, as if afraid the past might break their teeth. The sugar seeps into their blood like an old song, faint and aching. When they swallow, their throats tighten. They place the empty paper on their knees and stare at it, hollow-eyed, as if trying to remember how to breathe. The others do not look at them. Looking would make the rupture real. The monks rise and leave, their bare feet whispering against the floor, and the sweetness lingers behind like smoke from a struck match. For hours afterward, the silence of the monastery feels thinner, fragile as frost. In the nights that follow, the taste returns in dreams. They dream of festival streets, of lanterns trembling over dark canals, of candied beans rattling in lacquered bowls. They wake with their mouths dry and their hearts pounding as if they have run. The hunger curls inside them again, soft but insistent, and they lie in the dark, staring at the cracked beams overhead, listening to the wind slide its fingers along the roof. The urge to descend the mountain blooms sharp and sudden, like blood rushing to a long-starved limb. Some of them rise and pace the corridors until dawn bleaches the world flat again. Others bite the inside of their cheeks until they taste iron. They tell themselves it is only memory. They tell themselves the world they left has already forgotten them. And yet when the next offering comes, half a rice cake from a passing merchant, they take it. They break it into the smallest pieces they can and eat it alone in the garden, where the moss glows faintly in the mist. The sweetness is barely there, more idea than flavor, but it spreads through their chests like warmth, like defiance. For a few heartbeats, their bodies feel theirs again, not the monastery's. They hate that they like it. They love that they hate it. Afterward, they sit perfectly still, their hands folded, their mouths empty, as the cold air presses close. They watch the koi drift in the pond, slow and golden and thoughtless. They envy the koi. The fish have never had names to forget. The monks say desire is the root of suffering, and they nod, because they know. They have spent years scraping desire out of their bones with prayer and silence. But sweetness is not desire, not exactly. It is memory pretending to be taste, and memory is the one thing the silence has never been able to erase. As winter comes, the offerings cease. Snow settles on the roof tiles like ash. The world shrinks to the sound of their own breathing and the crunch of frost underfoot. Hunger goes quiet again, buried under the weight of cold. But sometimes, as they kneel on the frozen stones, raking the gravel garden into perfect lines, they think of roasted chestnuts, of syrup dripping from skewered dango, of sugar crusting their lips. They do not flinch when the thought pierces them. They let it in, let it drift through and fade. They have learned not to fight it. The ghosts of their former selves walk with them always. There is no point in chasing them away. In the end, they do not need the sweets themselves. The world can keep its markets, its lanterns, its molten gold. What they need is the space the thought of sweetness carves in them, a hollow, where the man they once were can sit quietly for a moment before dissolving again. They rise before dawn, sweep the cloisters, eat their silent rice, and fold themselves back into the stillness. No one speaks of the persimmons, or the yokan, or the rice cake. No one needs to. The memory of sweetness has joined the silence now, humming low and steady beneath it like a buried bell. The city no longer moves at their pace. It rushes, it clatters, it sparkles with glass-bright urgency, as if trying to shake the old centuries off its shoulders. The old stone gates have been pulled down to make way for shop fronts with painted signs, the moats filled in and paved, the watchtowers left to rot like abandoned teeth. Steam carriages scream down the avenues, shaking the earth, leaving trails of coal-stung wind that curl bitterly around their ankles. The last samurai stand at the edges of the crowds and watch as men in black western coats stride past without bowing, their hats cutting the air like foreign punctuation. No one lowers their voice anymore. No one steps aside. The streets that once parted around them, like ripples around a blade, now close over them without pause, swallowing them into anonymity. They are invisible, and yet too visible, out of place, out of time, their very stillness jarring against the city's fevered hum. Their swords hang unused in their homes like fossils. They cannot wear them openly now, not without drawing laughter or pity. And laughter is worse. They have spent decades shaping their bodies into silence, into perfect stillness, and the world has decided it no longer needs silence. It wants noise and speed and hunger that consumes everything in its path. They move through the new streets like stones rolling reluctantly downhill, heavy with a gravity the city has forgotten how to feel. People glance at them and glance away again, their eyes sliding off as though contact might stain. The samurai do not meet those eyes. They are learning the art of vanishing in plain sight. And yet, their mouths still remember. Somewhere under the ash of their discipline, hunger still flickers. It is different now, softened, almost tender. They no longer crave feasts or rituals. What they crave are fragments small, foolish, fleeting. the things the city tosses to children and apprentices and street dogs. They buy them with the quiet shame of old men buying illusions. Paper cones of candied chestnuts from stalls rattling with brass bells. Syrup, glossed senbei crackers that snap like thin ice. Skewers of grilled mochi, blistered gold over coals. They do not eat them in public. They slip into alleys, into the creases of the city no one notices anymore. The gaps where old plaster still clings to the bones of forgotten houses. There they unwrap their spoils, with the slow care of men disarming memories. The sweetness strikes them like a sudden chord. Their jaws pause, their eyes flicker, not closed, not open, just unfocused, as if the present has stepped aside to let the past pass through. The chestnut crumbles into sugary dust on their tongues, and they are 20 again, laughing with their comrades in a barracks courtyard, the winter air full of white breath and rice smoke. The senbei shatters between their teeth, and they are 12, barefoot in their mother's kitchen, stealing the browned crust from the rice pot. The mochi melts hot and soft, and they are 30, returning from a victorious campaign to a city drenched in lantern light. The taste lasts only a moment. The grief it wakes lasts much longer. They chew very slowly, as though the world might shatter if they finish too quickly. The sweetness seeps through them like warmth leaking from a cracked teacup. Not enough to fill them, only enough to make them remember they are hollow. When it is gone, they sit still for a long time, hands slack, breath shallow. The noise of the city eddies faintly at the mouth of the alley, all brass and laughter and steam. They stay until their pulse stops echoing in their ears, until the sweetness fades back into the dull air, until they are sure they can stand without breaking. Then they slip back into the current of the street, their faces smooth as lacquer, their eyes empty as extinguished lanterns. Some of them keep small boxes at home now, lacquer-chipped, hidden in drawers. Inside are not weapons or letters or medals, but sweets, cheap, fragile things wrapped in crinkling paper. It would have been unthinkable once. They keep them anyway. They ration them out in the deep hours when the city has gone quiet again, when the lamps have burned down to blue ghosts, and the only sound is the slow cracking of the roof beams in the night cold. They sit alone on their tatami and unwrap a single piece of hard candy, its surface clouded, its color fading. They let it rest on their tongue without biting. The sweetness blooms thin and distant, like sunlight trapped in amber. It tastes of everything that is already gone. They swallow it like a secret, and the room stays silent, and nothing changes. And yet for a few breaths, they can almost believe they are still real. They do not speak of this to one another. They rarely speak at all anymore. When they pass on the street, they avert their eyes, afraid that if they look too long, they will see their own hollowing reflected back. But they know. They can see it in the way the others' mouths twitch when they pass a stall, in the way their hands hover infinitesimally near the bright jars of sugar candy before retreating as though from flame. They are all unraveling the same way, one quiet sweet at a time. Sometimes they walk down to the docks at night, where the new ships hulk against the black water, their iron hulls snarling with foreign letters. The wind there smells of salt and coal and rust. Nothing like the old cedar sweet breath of the city they remember. They stand watching the cranes swing crates through the fog, and they eat the last of their chestnuts, rolling the brittle sweetness against their teeth as though trying to etch it into their bones before it vanishes. Around them the city roars on, impatient, already forgetting them. They let it. They stand very still, tasting the past in the hollow of their mouths, while the future howls past their shoulders. In the end, it is not about the sweets. It never was. It is about the thread, the thin, invisible filament that runs from the taste on their tongues back through all the selves they have been, back to the boy clutching his first rice ball, the young warrior stealing roasted yam from a street stall, the weary veteran savoring persimmons in the rain, the ghost in the monastery dreaming of yokan. The world is cutting that thread strand by strand, replacing it with noise and iron and speed. But as long as they can still taste sweetness, even a ghost of it, the thread holds. It hums faintly in their blood like the after-ring of a bell long since struck. And so they keep eating. Slowly, secretly, tenderly. They walk the new streets like shadows wearing borrowed faces. And when no one is looking, they place a fragment of the old world on their tongues and let it dissolve. The sweetness goes quickly. The silence it leaves lasts all night. By dawn, they will be hollow again, ready to be forgotten. But for this one fragile moment, as the city shivers and the stars gutter out, they are still here, still tethered, still, impossibly, whole. Of course. Let us drift now into the quiet that waits beyond all their footsteps, the hush that gathers at the edges of the world, when even the name samurai has grown thin as old silk, and the wind moves through the empty corridors of Edo like someone searching for something it can no longer name. This is the ending, though it does not call itself that. It arrives softly, like dusk slipping under a door, like the last warmth leaving a stone at twilight, and it does not ask for attention. It simply waits, as it has always waited, for the noise to burn itself out. The old streets are quieter now, though not because they are empty. The people rush faster than ever, faces pale with urgency, but their voices seem distant, muffled, as if carried on a wind from another world. The paper lanterns sway on their hooks above the market lanes, their light faint and blurred at the edges, and the steam from the food stalls curls into the dark with no one pausing to breathe it in. The world has learned how to move without looking, how to eat without tasting, how to live without lingering. The last echoes of the samurai drift through it like the afterimage of a bell's vibration, inaudible to most, but still there if you stand very still and listen with your bones. Here and there, you can still find them, though they do not stand out anymore. They are folded into the crowd like forgotten creases in a well-worn cloth. An old man hunched under a persimmon tree, breaking a chestnut with hands that remember a sword's weight. A thin figure in a dark coat pausing at the edge of a candy stall, eyes lingering on the glass jars before turning away. No one knows what they are looking for. Perhaps they do not know either, but you can see something flicker across their faces, quick and secret, when the scent of roasted sweet potatoes drifts through the air, or the sugar mallet cracks a rice cracker in two. It is not hunger. It is something older, softer, almost sorrowful, the recognition of a thread still holding, however frayed. They do not talk about it. Their mouths have grown careful. Words can shatter fragile things, and what they carry is more fragile than breath. It is not honor, not memory, not pride. Those were peeled away long ago. What they carry now is smaller and deeper, the quiet proof that they have not dissolved completely. That somewhere inside the armor that rusted, the banners that fell, the silence that thickened, there is still a mouth that can taste, a heart that can soften, a self that has not entirely let go. They hold this proof on their tongues in fragments, a grain of sugar, a sliver of bean paste, a sip of syrup-stained tea. It is not enough to fill them. It is only enough to keep them from fading like smoke. Sometimes, if you follow them, you will see where they go when the crowds thin. They slip down the narrow alleys where moss grows between the stones, where the lamps are dim and the walls lean close, like listening shoulders. They walk slower there, their shoulders loosening, their steps softening, as though the air itself has remembered how to hold them gently. They stop at the crooked old stalls that seem too tired to call out anymore, where a single brazier glows and the vendor dozes behind it. They buy something small and warm and unnecessary, and they carry it with both hands as though it might vanish if held carelessly. They do not eat it right away. They walk with it, letting the heat seep through their fingers, letting anticipation bloom quiet and slow. When they finally eat, they do it alone, always alone. On a stone bench by the canal, under the drooping branches of a plum tree, in the shadowed courtyard of a shrine long since forgotten, they eat as though the world is not watching, and perhaps it isn't. They bite softly. They chew slowly. They let the sweetness bloom and fade like the ghost of sunlight on closed eyelids. And as it fades, something inside them exhales a long, thin breath they have been holding for decades. The noise of the city drifts farther away. The years do too. For a few weightless moments, they are not the remnants of an old world or the ruins of old oaths. They are just men, sitting very still, tasting something that expects nothing from them. The night closes gently around them. The air cools, the stalls shudder, the world keeps rushing, but they linger, eyes lowered, hands quiet in their laps, the sweetness already gone from their mouths, yet still echoing faintly in their blood like a fading bell tone. They know it will not last. They do not want it to. Lasting is not the point. Lasting was always the trap. The point is this, that for one small, vanishing moment, they stepped outside of everything, the duty, the loss, even their own names, and felt the world soften on their tongues. That they were still capable of that. That they are still here, and maybe you will walk past them then, your own steps quick and thoughtless, your mind tangled in the machinery of your day. Maybe you will smell the roasted chestnuts, or hear the sugar crack under the mallet, and you will not stop. But maybe, somewhere deep inside you, something will pause. Maybe you will remember the first thing you ever tasted that made you feel alive, and how it made the world hush for a moment, and how you wanted that hush to last forever. And maybe that memory will cling to you like a thin thread, humming faint and steady, all the way home. So if you find yourself walking the quiet streets of Edo, when the lanterns have gone dim, and the stones are still warm from the day, look closely at the shadows near the shuttered stalls. You might see an old figure there, chewing slowly, eyes soft with something the world has forgotten how to name. Do not speak, do not ask, just walk softly, and let the silence settle on your shoulders, and let the night close gently behind you like a paper screen. And if you carry anything from this place, let it be this, that even at the farthest edges of time, even after everything else has been stripped away, there are still small sweetnesses left in the world, waiting quietly for whoever remembers how to taste them. And perhaps tomorrow, if you return, there will be another story waiting softly curled like steam above the stalls, patient as dusk, ready to whisper again when you are. Until then, my friend, rest well.